Welcome, everyone. Welcome to session 1D, which is evidence-based resources to help families learn about and support their literacy development. I'm Jeanette Mejias with SPAN, and I will be moderating this session. All participants will be in the mute option so that there's no feedback and we can be able to hear our presenter. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat box, as our presenter is going to be able to address any questions throughout the presentation. It's my distinct pleasure to turn over the presentation to our speaker, Sarah Sayko, who's Deputy Director. Sarah?
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session today. I'm very pleased that you're able to join me and looking forward to our time together here. We have till about 3:55 to discuss and learn about evidence-based resources to help families learn about and support their child's literacy development. I wanted to, next slide, please. I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about the National Center on Improving Literacy for those who don't know. Next slide, please. Jenna, I think I still see the title. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm seeing the next slide now. Thank you. NCIL, as we're known, or NCIL, is a federally funded national technical Assistance Center established by the Every Student Succeeds Act in the fall of 2016 and is jointly administered by the Office of Special Education Programs and the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. So we're heading into our 5th and final year this coming October 1st through September 30th. Next slide, please. And NCIL is a partnership among literacy experts, university researchers, and technical assistance providers. Specifically, the partners are the Center for Teaching and Learning from the University of Oregon, the Florida Center for Reading Research at Florida State University, and RMC Research Corporation in Arlington, Virginia. Next slide, please. Here you see NCIL's mission. So it's to increase access to and use of evidence-based approaches to screen, identify, and teach pre-K through 12 students with or at risk for literacy-related disabilities, including dyslexia. And we have 5 major priority areas, which you see here. One of those priority areas is priority area 3, which I lead. And that work is centered on providing families of students with evidence-based information and access to information around screening, identification, and teaching students with literacy-related disabilities, including dyslexia, and collaborating with the parent training centers of the OSEP network. So I'm really happy to be here with you today, and I'm hoping that through our time together, you'll come away with some information that will help you support the families in your organization around literacy-related issues, and also to have a better understanding of the types of free evidence-based resources that are available to you and your staff to promote these types of practices with families. Next slide, please. So you see the objectives here. For the time that we have, it'll really be broken into 3 main sections. First, I'm going to start with an explanation of a system of literacy services and supports for literacy that we subscribe to at NCIL so that you have an understanding of our approach. Second, big section, we'll talk about the roles that schools and families can play within that system. And we'll end our time by me overviewing some of those free NCIL evidence-based resources that are available to you. Next slide, please. Great. So we'll jump in with a system of literacy services and support. And you know, as we at NCIL say, and I'm sure I'm with a group of like-minded individuals, that in order to really build strong relationships and effective partnerships between home and school for literacy learning, and all learning really, it's first key to consider effective family and community engagement practices and use them as the foundation of this goal. So that's where we'll start first, with looking at how we see the system working at ENSEL. Next slide, please. So you see here, there's a graphic that illustrates a system of literacy support and services. And really, families and educators can work together to ensure that children have successful literacy experiences in and out of school. And this is especially important if children have reading difficulties. So children with reading difficulties have specific instructional needs that are best addressed within a comprehensive approach to literacy-related services involving both school and home. So if we subscribe to this idea that the system of support represents things that happen both inside school and outside school, then we can really see how schools and families both have important roles to play in this system of services and support for literacy learning. So a system of literacy services and support is the combination of activities that happen during and outside of school. Importantly, these responsibilities are shared across both sides, especially in our current climate where we are in a remote learning situation, whether it's fully virtual, distance, or a hybrid approach. This system builds on the strengths of both school and home to help children succeed. And when the focus is only on what happens in or out of school instead of across the two, children may miss important learning opportunities. So building this environmental congruence builds on strengths across settings and highlights similarities in school and family practices. So a system of literacy support and services works best when in and out of school activities are coordinated and aligned. So for example, schools can provide families with home activities that reinforce literacy skills previously learned at school, or extra practice opportunities for skills currently being learned. But to do this, there must be regular occasions for schools and families to communicate and interact. And this involves the children too. Regular and positive communication and interactions between schools and families make partnering to support children's literacy learning possible. And this is especially important in remote learning, which may not resemble a traditional school day. Next slide, please. So what could a system of literacy supports and services look like? One example is a multi-tiered system of support for reading, or MTSSR. I'm sure many of you in your organizations are familiar with this type of framework to help support children with or at risk for disabilities, including learning disabilities. So just as a quick recap, MTSSR is really, the orientation is around problem solving. So problem solving is the orientation and the set of activities that bring families and educators together to support student learning and competence in an MTSSR. So just as students are supported at increasingly higher levels of intensity within an MTSSR, each subsequent level of family engagement requires greater amounts of time, commitment, and contribution on the part of families and educators. And I just want to pause there for that to really resonate with you, because something we often hear, for example, from schools, is that they haven't really thought of family engagement in the context of a multi-tiered system of support. And the notion that they can engage with families at differing levels of intensity, just in the same way as they provide students with differing levels of instructional intensity, is really a new idea and a new way to think about family engagement to support literacy learning. So to start, schools should provide ways for families to learn about their MTSSR, why it's being used, and how their children are being supported within that system. And when schools are doing so, they should really be carefully explaining the academic or technical jargon or limits its use. And we know, and you know, that families are important to the MTSS problem-solving process. So together with families, schools should review data and make data-based decisions for children's literacy learning. They should offer regular occasions for families to share their interests or needs with them, so the opportunities can be better matched to the learning wishes of families. And there's many ways that we can convey to families that they can participate in the MTSSR process to support their children in all tiers. And the key is really for families to have opportunities to do so by the school. So for example, families can help the school understand their background, culture, and goals for their children. They can provide schools with information to address the needs and interests of other families like theirs. Perhaps families are seeking information or training offered by the school on specific literacy topics, or want to know how to best support their children's literacy development at home. Other topics or areas of involvement can focus on family interest in volunteering at the school or organizing help and support from other families. They can help make school literacy decisions that benefit all children by participating on school improvement teams, committees, or other types of school-based groups. Or perhaps they want to help develop home literacy lending kits, or be involved in after-school literacy programs, or link families to community resources to support literacy learning. And really, we at ENSEL, and like you at the Parent Center Network, are always interested in conveying to families that they are key decision makers in their children's literacy learning, and to really help them to see that schools should be offering various ways for them to be involved and provide feedback and give feedback on their children's literacy goals, instruction, and support. Next slide, please. So we're often asked, well, what could this look like? What could family engagement in this type of system, where it gets more intensive as children's needs are more intensive, look like? So, it will likely depend on the setting within the school and the needs of particular families. But since each tier involves a greater intensity of services and support for children, a greater intensity of communication and collaboration is also needed between families and schools. So, for example, in Tier 1, which is often the core classroom instruction that happens in schools, families may receive information, materials, and announcements about events that focus on the school's approach to teaching literacy and learning, the literacy curricula, the literacy goals, screening data, and ways that families can support their children's literacy development at home. For instance, family literacy nights, group literacy discussions, and guest speakers on family requested literacy topics. So this is often the sort of traditional events and ideas that we think about when we think of family engagement at Tier 1. However, in Tier 2, families, to increase that intensity, families may receive information materials, progress monitoring data, and announcements about events matched to the literacy needs of their children, and ways for families to specifically support literacy needs of their identified children at home. So engagement at this tier is meant to prevent further literacy difficulties by coordinating and aligning activities between home and school. In Tier 3, sort of that most intensive tier, we would expect even more interaction and engagement between families and schools. And so families may receive information materials, progress monitoring data, just like in Tier 2, but also training matched to the individual literacy needs of their children, including ways, and this is key, to intensify support of their children's literacy needs at home. Schools can help families learn intervention strategies and activities that they can do and practice at home that are linked to their children's literacy goals. And so how do we know that schools are really building dual capacity for family-school partnerships for literacy learning? We would expect, and we at ENSEL encourage schools to collect fidelity of implementation data on their family engagement practices, just like they would do in other areas like instruction and assessment and professional learning. They should also be taking stock of their family engagement practices through methods like family surveys, interviews with families and community members, focus groups, and from parent or family liaisons. Next slide, please. So I just want to pause there for a moment. That's really the overview of ENSEL's approach to thinking about family engagement. We do that within, again, the context of a multi-tiered system of support for reading, or MTSSR. And so I just want to pause there to see if there's any questions about that overall approach or the role of families and parents in that system before we dive into the specific roles that we see schools and families playing. And I'll just pause just in case anyone has any questions in the chat that they'd like to pose about that content or those ideas.
So Miriam, if you can check the chat box to see if there's any questions for Sarah. Unfortunately, since I have a shared screen, I'm unable to check the chat box. Yes. But if you can do that, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
I am checking the chat box, and there's a question from Monique Bankster. Do parents just request MTSSR?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Monique. So no, MTSSR is a framework that a school can adopt as a way to support students of differing learning needs at the school. And so while many or most schools have some type of MTSSR framework in place to structure the support and services that they provide to students, some may not have or use that particular framework. However, all schools have some type of framework that they use to systematically think about the supports and services that they're providing to children around literacy, learning, and development. So through ESSA and other state policies, most schools are required or recommended to implement some type of MTSS-like framework. So if their child's school doesn't have an MTSSR in place, then I would encourage families to ask, what is the system of support and services that you provide at your school for literacy learning? And that question can help families get a better sense of the type of approach that is being used at their school. And if their school is indeed using an MTSSR, then we at ENSEL in particular have lots of resources for them to get better acquainted with that approach and to empower them through questions that they could ask that could help develop further understanding of that approach and where their child fits in. Thank you, Monique, for that question.
I don't see any other questions at the moment.
Okay, great. All right, so now that we have a sense of what ENSEL's approach is to family engagement within the system of support, I want to talk more specifically about the roles of schools and families. And so really, in order to build strong relationships and effective partnerships between home and school for literacy learning, it's key to first consider overall effective family and community engagement practices and use them as the foundation for this goal, like I said earlier. So really, that's where we'll start with diving in specifically to the key roles we at ENSEL see for literacy learning. And these roles apply to both families and schools. So on the screen, you see a graphic. It's really an infographic that ENSEL has produced, and I believe I attached it as a handout to our session today. And this is an overview of the 4 key roles. So in order for educators and families to work in mutually supportive ways to implement evidence-based literacy within an MTSSR, we need to look closer at key roles that they can play to be empowered and engaged. Taken together, these diverse roles represent shared leadership between school and home. And we know, and I think I said it earlier, that families and educators both play important roles in this MTSSR to improve literacy outcomes. And we see them having important roles through 4 key actions. And these are the key words or actions that we use to ground the practices. And those key actions are learn, advocate, partner, and support. And you see them represented in each one of the quadrants in the graphic. I know the graphic is a little fuzzy, but you do have it to download in your handouts. So learn is focused on families and educators as co-learners, monitors, and observers. For example, understanding the parts of literacy, how children learn to read, and why they might struggle. Advocate is about families and educators as co-advocates and models. So for example, promoting evidence-based literacy approaches in schools and early childhood settings. Partner centers on families and educators as co-communicators, co-problem solvers, co-decision makers. For example, working together within a comprehensive system of support like MTSSR. And lastly, support is about families and educators as co-supporters, teachers, creators, and encouragers. For example, providing literacy opportunities and reinforcing skills taught in school. Regardless of the role taken by family members, families and educators inform one another and share their expertise and knowledge about children to support literacy learning and promote competence. So enhancing student reading outcomes is the goal of family-school collaboration and relationships across and within the 3 tiers. Next slide, please. So that is our infographic to orient you, and you in turn can orient families to those 4 key roles. And then we at ENSEL have 4 additional infographics and literacy briefs that break down each of those 4 roles in a little more specificity. So it goes a little deeper into what those roles look like. So the first one that I want to talk about is the role of partner, or the action of partner. And you see on the slide here, there's a snapshot of our infographic for partnership or partner. So positive homeschool relationships are important for literacy learning. Schools and families can address concerns about a child's literacy skills and academic progress together. Schools should provide families with activities and tools that a child could use at home, and also provide opportunities for families to stay involved. They should and can talk about instruction and intervention a child receives at school. And being involved will really help families catch reading difficulties early. And it, of course, also helps a child to be more successful in school. So our partnership role really focuses on 4 big ideas that you see here. Talk and interact often, discuss literacy instruction and intervention, practice literacy skills at home, and address concerns about children's literacy skills and academic progress together. So each of those 4 big ideas are discussed a little further in this particular infographic and literacy brief. And then we have the 3 remaining roles that I'd like to overview with you next. Next slide, please. So the next infographic and literacy brief is the Learn action. And you see the snapshot here of the infographic for that particular literacy brief. And we know that children struggle to read or write for many reasons. They may have trouble breaking words into sounds, understanding what they read or with language. Children can also struggle because instruction may not be matched to their needs. So understanding how children learn to read can help families recognize a child's reading and writing problems. If they have concerns about their child's progress, they can share them with the teacher, and the teacher can share them with the children, with families. So, for example, a vision or hearing issue may be interfering with a child's ability to read. So being informed can help families make better decisions about a child's education. So this particular role of Learn goes over these 4 big ideas. The first one, in understanding the parts of literacy, we know that learning to read is difficult and it does not happen naturally. And many parents and caregivers are not aware that reading is not a natural process like developing languages. Language we just acquire by hearing language spoken, and reading is not like that. Our brains are not wired to read. So early instruction in phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension will help children learn to read. And they can struggle to read for many reasons. So families knowing what those reasons are can really help them have better conversations with the school and pinpoint what their children's learning needs are and get the appropriate supports for their child. So some of the reasons why children might struggle could be trouble recognizing words, trouble understanding what is read, having limited English language ability, limited experience with print, or a mismatch between the type of instruction they're receiving, and their specific literacy needs, or a combination thereof of any of those. So it's important for parents and caregivers to feel comfortable and empowered to speak up if they have concerns about their child's literacy progress in school, and also to be aware that it's important to share if there's a family history of reading difficulties. Because in the case of something like dyslexia, we know that there is a large hereditary component. So if there's a family member who did struggle to learn to read, or still does struggle to read, that's an important indicator to raise. The good news is we know that reading difficulties can be spotted early. So having families know the signs of risk for reading difficulties is also empowering. Excuse me. For example, noticing and naming rhymes. And these are the inability to do so, of noticing and naming rhymes, noticing and playing with individual sounds in spoken words, being able to quickly name aloud a series of familiar items like letters, numbers, or colors, sounding out unknown words, remembering words seen many times before, remembering the ideas in a story, or spelling words correctly. All could be a really early warning sign of a risk for future reading difficulties. And some of these signs can be recognized before children actually are decoding words, are reading words in print. So this particular infographic we think is a great one as an orientation to these ideas for families, and can be used by you to do so. Next slide, please. Another of our roles or actions is the role of support. And here's a snapshot of our infographic that talks about supporting. So practicing at home the skills learned at school is really important, especially for children with reading difficulties. So children with reading difficulties benefit most from practicing skills. And we know that children often do not have enough practice opportunities at school for their reading skills. And so it becomes really critical in this approach, comprehensive approach to literacy learning, that we think of home and school as a continuum, where we can increase the number of practice opportunities as well as positive interactions with an adult around learning by extending that learning environment to home. So schools can offer families information about what to practice. At home, everyday activities are a great way to boost literacy development. Talking with children, asking questions and listening closely to their answers, reading together, saying the alphabet, playing with spoken sounds, and matching letters with sounds. So we encourage families to explore their community, talk about it to help children learn about the world around them, developing world knowledge and background knowledge by talking is a very powerful precursor to reading. Next slide, please. And our fourth and final role is the role of advocate. And here you see a snapshot of our infographic for advocate. We are always trying at ENSEL to infuse advocacy into all of our family resources. And we hope that our resources help families and help parent centers to work with families to learn ways to advocate for their children's education specific to literacy learning. We, of course, are always focused on families, educators, and community members working together So for example, we talk about these three big ideas in our advocate brief. As you can see, they're specific to literacy and our mission, which is the use of evidence-based literacy programs and instruction, the use of additional instructional time for struggling readers and readers with reading disabilities, and then to really further the use of data for instructional decision making. These are really core elements of an MTSSR, and we hope that our resources help families to understand more about what makes a program evidence-based and what makes instruction evidence-based. So they're able and empowered to have those discussions with their school and to better advocate for the right type of instruction and interventions to support their children. So all of these literacy briefs and the infographics that I just overviewed of those 4 key roles are available for download at the ENSEL website. That website, which I'll display at the end of the session today, is improvingliteracy.org. And you can go right to our tools and resources drop-down menu, and you will see learning literacy briefs, and there you will find the infographics and briefs on these 4 roles. And I would encourage you to think of them as a great way to introduce these ideas and these actions to families. They can be used as a touchstone text or document to discuss the ideas further, and then to locate complementary resources from, for example, our resource repository, which I'll talk more about later, that have specific activities or actions for families to take when they go back into their child's school, or they try to enact these actions in their setting. So again, these infographics and literacy briefs are an introduction to these topics, and I would encourage you to think about them in that way and as a way to open up these ideas for parents and caregivers and to dive deeper into them over time. Next slide, please. So I just want to pause there. Now that you've heard a little bit about the 4 key roles that we see families and schools playing: learn, advocate, partner, and support. In your context, in your setting, working with parents and caregivers, if you can just type into the chat what role you think has been most challenging for families to enact when they're working with their child's school. Would you say it's learn in all the ways that we described, advocate, partner, support?
Yeah, we have a few responses. We have all of them: partner, support and learn, advocate and support, partner, partner, support, partner, partner, advocate. A lot of partners.
Yeah, so that really mirrors what we often hear from others about the most challenging role. It's often around that role of partnership, but you can see how these 4 roles do interact with one another. And so we really try to be able to provide some resources and support that would build help schools to see the assets that families bring to the table, and also to rethink their current engagement practices for families. And partnership is often the biggest hurdle to overcome. We find that with Learn, we often can provide information to families, and you at parent centers probably face this, where it might be easier to help build knowledge in parents, but when it comes to advocating or working with the school, that's where we see the most difficulties happening. Yeah. And also families are always willing, often to support and have high expectations for their children, they often just don't know the right ways to do it and are looking to the school to provide some guidance so that they can take on that role at home.
There's a question and a couple of comments. The question is, how do you help families navigate, support, or services? And another comment is, only the privileged advocate and support.
Yeah, that's really that's really insightful. We've had a lot of discussions at ENSEL about the role of advocate and how for us, we're challenging ourselves to rethink the role of advocate, because we often think of it as someone who is in a position of authority or who has the confidence and knowledge to be able to speak on behalf of their child or others. And advocate, we're trying to think of in empowering all families to be advocates, even if it is in what some might consider a smaller role than the traditional definition of an advocate, where it's someone going in and speaking, for example, at an IEP meeting as a professional advocate. But it starts with being able to feel confident and comfortable with engaging in discussions and interactions with the school, and the school providing that and welcoming environment for families to do that. And if that doesn't exist, it becomes really difficult to be able to bridge that gap. And so we're hoping that some of our resources have an advocacy undercurrent through them, so that families are equipped with the right kinds of questions to ask, so that they can then in turn work through fulfilling that role of an advocate if they so choose. Because again, an advocate can be an advocate for your own child, could be advocate for a group of children like theirs, or it can be an advocate for all children. In different, and those all can look different in some ways. So the advocacy is challenging, and some don't feel like they have the skills to advocate. And really, we feel that all families do have the skills. They might need to be cultivated, and there might be some knowledge that need to be built, but often the onus is really on the schools and the early childhood settings to provide that environment that respects families in a way where they can do that. So thank you for all your comments about these roles. And we've used these 4 roles then to build out the family resources that we have at ENSEL. And so I've said before that the literacy briefs and infographics that you just saw is an introduction to these concepts. We then have built a suite of resources around each of these roles, so that over time, families, if they want on their own, could explore our resources further and dive deep into one or more of these roles, or a parent center can use these resources to provide training, provide facilitated discussions with families to explore these concepts more deeply. And we try to always build in practical activities or practical actions that families can take away from these resources. So I think, let me see if I'm correct. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, so I want to spend our remaining time really diving into the family resources that ENSEL has, so that you know when you leave here today as family center, parent center staff, what you might have to both build your staff's capacity around literacy, education, to better serve the families in your organization, or if you have staff who already have literacy expertise, then these might be resources that you can go to help families better partner, advocate, support, and learn around literacy that have already been vetted by a credible source. We've done a lot of the groundwork and the back work to ensure that we're only providing families with what we know works, and trying to translate that in accessible ways for all families. So I just want to start by giving a shout out to both Family Connection of South Carolina and PTSI in Virginia for their work in collaborating with ENSEL to pilot 2 of our family-based tutorials. And I'll go over those tutorials today. So I just wanted to thank them again, both organizations, for their participation in the pilot project. It was a pleasure working with both of you, and I believe they'll be continuing to refer to some of our resources in the future. Next slide, please. So 2 implementation toolkits that I like to highlight that are specific to families. One is our Supporting Your Child's Literacy Development Toolkit, and another one is Supporting Students with Reading Needs Toolkit. At the ENSEL website, in our drop-down menu, you can go directly to our implementation toolkits, and there you'll see some toolkits that are specific to educators, some that are specific to families, and some that are applicable to both educators and families. These 2 in particular were designed just for families. Thank you again for Family Connections of South Carolina. They were our partner in piloting the Supporting Your Child's Literacy Development Toolkit. So this particular toolkit on the left of the screen is an online implementation toolkit that helps families take part in literacy experiences at home to develop children's reading and language skills. In this tutorial, it's a self-study on-demand tutorial for families. So you would go directly to the website, access the toolkit, and within the toolkit is the tutorial that they would stream directly from a computer, iPad, or smartphone. It can be returned to at any time, and it will save your spot. But we also, in the implementation toolkit, and this is important for parent center staff to be aware, we have a facilitator guide where you can take the content within the toolkit, specifically the tutorial, and transform it into an in-person workshop. So that facilitator guide has the materials to help you do that, whether you want to do it as a series of workshops directly to families, as a virtual course, as an online professional learning community with families. The tools are there to help you and support you in the facilitation of this content directly with families. So for the Supporting Your Child's Literacy Development Toolkit, families will learn strategies, tips, and activities to help their children develop as a reader from preschool through adolescence, how to look, listen, help, and encourage their children while they participate in activities together. So this toolkit includes an online tutorial, supporting materials, related resources, and a facilitator guide for parent center staff or other family-focused organizations to use. So this particular toolkit is for all children. So regardless of if a child has been diagnosed or identified as having a reading disability or is at risk for developing one, this particular toolkit is still applicable. And it would even be applicable for parents who don't yet know if their child may be a struggling reader, or have any kind of reading difficulties, but just want to learn some of the evidence-based ways to support their children's literacy development at home. And then this other toolkit on the right, supporting students with reading needs. We developed this one in conjunction with the Idaho Department of Education. It has very practical video clips of children with different types of learning challenges and physical challenges engaged in reading activities with family members. And again, provides great information, practical, everyday ways that they can support their children's reading needs at home.
Yeah, Sarah, somebody's asking which toolkit can be turned into a workshop.
That's great. So all of them, each of the toolkits for families, with the exception of the supporting students with reading needs, the one on the right that was developed with Idaho Department of Education, that one does not have a facilitator guide. The supporting your child's literacy development toolkit, the one on the left side of the screen, that has a facilitator guide and information to turn it into a workshop. And then we soon will be releasing, I'll share this in a little bit, soon we'll be releasing the Learning About Your Child's Reading Development Implementation Toolkit. That's based on our Learn role, if you recall those 4 roles. We will ultimately have an implementation toolkit for each of those 4 roles: support, partner, learn, and advocate. We currently have the support one available. We will very shortly be releasing the Learn toolkit. That will have a facilitator guide. And then in our last year, in this coming year, we will be releasing our partner toolkit and our advocate toolkit, all of which will have a facilitator guide attached to it. So we're hoping there's different ways that families can access this material. One is through on their own, online, by coming to our website. Another would be through you at the Parent Center staff, by either sharing some of the resources from our website directly with them, or transforming one of our tutorials into a workshop series. And again, the facilitator guide will give directions on how to do that.
Okay, Andrea, I'm sorry, Sarah, Andrea's asking if you are familiar with Reach Every Reader.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we are familiar with Reach Every Reader. And in fact, some of our staff at Ensel are doing collaborative work with the Reach Every Reader project. So that is a wonderful project. I think we have like-minded missions. And in fact, I'll be sharing with you one tool that was actually developed, co-branded by both that effort as well as Ensel. So I'll be coming to that shortly, so stay tuned. Next slide, please. Okay, very applicable to our current circumstance. We just released over the past month or so our remote literacy learning toolkit. This toolkit, it does not have a facilitator guide attached to it. It is appropriate for both families and schools. It's an extension of what we would consider to be a resource around that role of partner. It's not our partner toolkit, but we quickly developed this remote literacy learning toolkit that's grounded in the idea of homeschool partnerships. As we know, in remote learning, families and schools need to work even more closely together than they have ever before. So we have some great materials in our remote literacy learning toolkit for families. We have an infographic that we call Coaching Steps for Families that outline explicit instruction in a family-friendly way, so parents can learn how to be a coach to their child, encouraging them in this remote learning environment and intervene when necessary with the right kind of support and scaffolds. And so I encourage you to check out our remote literacy learning toolkit and look at our briefs and infographics designed just for families. And we have a large array of resources that we curated just for families around the topic of remote literacy learning and the kinds of things that they can do, both with the school and at home. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of our Learning About Your Child's Reading Development tutorial. This tutorial resides on our website just as a tutorial right now, but I mentioned we are soon going to be releasing this topic as a toolkit, which means it will include much more than just this tutorial. It will look very similar to that Supporting Your Child's Literacy Development at Home toolkit, but will be focused on this role of learn. This is the toolkit that Pizzi partnered with us to pilot. They did this as a virtual course with parents and caregivers. And so the purpose of this online tutorial is to expand upon information in our Learning About Your Child's Reading Development brief and infographic. In the tutorial, participants will learn evidence-based information about children's reading development from preschool through adolescence, all in an interactive online experience. So it includes a table of contents, just like the other tutorials, that can be used to tailor information to participants in a shorter, more targeted experience if needed. And so the topics that are talked about in this tutorial are the skills needed to learn to read, how reading typically develops, why children might struggle to read, and signs of risk for reading difficulties. Again, applicable preschool through grade 12, and it's self-study on demand. Next slide, please. On NSIL's website, we also have a devoted page that is called the Kid Zone. And so the Kid Zone is a little different than the other resources that I'm sharing with you today, but this is a place meant and designed specifically for kids. It's a place where parents and caregivers can participate as their child builds literacy skills in a fun and interactive way. It includes literacy games, audiobooks, ebooks, streaming videos of books read aloud, and NSIL's original comic book series, which is called AR, Adventures in Reading, which stars a protagonist with dyslexia. The site has tips for how parents and caregivers can interact with their children as they explore the Kid Zone. And this is especially, I think, a powerful resource in a remote learning context where, you know, if there's not a lot of print books available at home and families have an broadband access, they can go to our Kid Zone and all of the games and books and resources are free within the Kid Zone. So we think that's great, and we continue to curate and build out and increase our collection of resources within the Kid Zone, and we've really vetted all of those resources as well. Next slide, please. This is our resource repository. It serves as a library of resources that NSIL staff has curated related to a wide range of topics. And so if you go to our resource repository, you can see there's a find resources column on the left side where you can sort the resources currently in our collection by audience type. And one type would be parents and caregivers. You can sort by topics, such as beginning reading, intervention, dyslexia, partnerships, advocacy, and resource type. We have everything from information sheets, lesson plans, videos, audio, to find information best suited to the needs and wishes of families. So you can use this as parent center staff to locate high quality resources and also help families to use the resource repository to find what they need.
There's a question, somebody wants to know if the site is free.
Yes, everything at Ensel is free. So the Kids Zone and everything within the Kids Zone in terms of the games and ebooks, audiobooks, comics, all of that is free, and all of the resources that I'm overviewing right now are free.
And also if you have any resources for teaching children with intellectual disabilities to read.
We don't have any specific resources that address that particular population, but in some of our resources, we do stress how teaching the big ideas of reading, such as phonological awareness and alphabetic principle, that children with intellectual disabilities can learn to read and can effectively be taught these skills with the right type of instruction. It may take a little longer and more practice and more intervention might be needed, but we stress to both families and educators that children with intellectual disabilities can still learn to read. So we convey the big ideas, but we don't specifically have resources on students with intellectual disabilities because our mission is focused on children with specific learning disabilities in reading. So that's the population that we are particularly focused on. Next slide, please. This is our literacy skill checklist. So this is a tool designed to guide parents, caregivers, and even professionals in recording the presence of important reading, writing, and language skills in kindergarten through grade 2. It is important to note that this tool is not intended to be used as a formal screener or diagnostic tool for learning disabilities, including risk for dyslexia, but this tool will provide a list of personalized resources to families based on their answers to the checklist questions. And those resources come from Ensel and from resources from other organizations in our resource repository. So it's a great way for a parent or caregiver or parent center staff, if you would want to guide a parent through the checklist process of answering the questions, that would provide them immediately with some resources that are specific to their child's needs, and then also as a way to engage or start a conversation with their child's school around specific concerns or needs that they might have. And then a new resource that just came out, this is the one that I mentioned earlier, was co-branded by Ensel and Reach Every Reader, which is called our CBM at Home. It is a tool that helps parents and caregivers to conduct their own curriculum-based measure, that's what CBM stands for, at home. So as a school might typically use a screening measure at home, at school, to identify a child's risk level for difficulties in the future, we have developed this tool, which is especially important in this remote context, where a parent, free of charge, could download the CBM measures and administer a CBM assessment at home with their child. And it includes videos of how to do that, and also all the tools to administer the assessment. And then they would use the website to put in the results of the assessment, and the website itself would give the parent the score of their child and provide more information about what that score means. And then also provide them with some additional resources to support development in the skills in which the child really might be having some difficulty in. So I wanted to share that one, mention that. Again, that's called CBM at Home. CBM stands for Curriculum-Based Measure. Okay. And next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our website. At the top, you see our web address, improvingliteracy.org. This is what the homepage looks like. And this is where you will find all of the resources that I overviewed today. And as I mentioned before, we're continuing to develop more free evidence-based resources that are specific for families. And we would encourage and welcome your partnership and collaboration in helping us disseminate these materials more broadly to families nationwide. And we're trying to also learn from what families are looking for around the topic of literacy. And always welcome your feedback from what you're hearing directly from families. And that helps us to inform the types of resources that we might develop in the future. Again, this is our 5th and final year. We have a lot of new resources coming out in our remaining year, but we still would continue to welcome your feedback and would love to hear from you if you use some of these resources with families and caregivers, how you're using them and your reaction to them. And also your staff's needs in terms of what would help build your staff's capacity to be able to use these resources more effectively with families. Next slide, please. So here's our website. We have on our website a space where you can sign up to receive our newsletter. And here is our Twitter handle and our Facebook page, where you can stay up to date on information as well that Ensel is sharing. And I will just pause there to see, I know I went through a lot of different resources and a lot of information, but just pause there to see if we have any questions in our last few minutes.
Yeah, there's a question about the project. If the project or when the project ends, will the website continue?
We hope so. We hope so. You know, I don't know, I can't say for certain how or when if it will continue. It may, someone else may host it, but there's certainly a lot of information there that we hope would continue to be available, even if the project concludes. We're not certain if there will be a recompete of this particular center or not, but we do hope and are committed to finding ways to keep these resources available, regardless of circumstance.
I'm sorry, there was a question before earlier about when you were talking about the different roles of the families and all that. And the question is, does not Title I rules require schools to do many of the things that you are talking about? And if so, how could this help parents of kids with disabilities?
Yeah, so I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, so there is under ESSA, you know, there's more robust family engagement requirements and recommendations under Title I in particular. And so we see much of the work that we're doing as being more sustainable if it's thought about in a systemic way. And so leveraging the Title I requirements around family engagement to promote literacy learning for students with or at risk for reading disabilities. And so we have many infographics that I didn't share here today that are part of the toolkits that are infographics that just simply have questions that families can ask to interrogate the practices at the school that are sort of based on what we know is required or recommended through ESSA and based upon evidence-based practices. So we are trying to also work with schools to better connect what they're doing and not think of what we're promoting as something as an add-on to their family engagement practices, but really embedded within what they might be doing already as part of Title I requirements. So I'm not sure if that answered the question in particular, but I did want to mention that. And I also saw that someone asked about the CBM at home website, and you're correct, it's not yet linked to our website. So in the chat, I shared the direct link to the CBM at home website. So click on that and then feel free to bookmark that so that you can refer to it. We're going to incorporate that as part of our remote literacy learning toolkit. So it may not be there now, but it will be in addition to that, because we see that as a nice resource when we're talking about remote learning for parents to have access to.
Okay, I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
And the room will close. We have like 5 more minutes at the most, because the room will close and we have to go to the main room again.
Okay, well, I thank everyone for your time and your participation. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions. And again, we'd love to hear from you. So please, if you use or disseminate any of our resources, let me know what you're doing, what the reaction was, and what you need. Thank you so much.